The Halloween house that came back to life at midnight. The lights came back on at exactly midnight. One moment the Victorian house on Hollow Street was a dark shape on the hill, 2 stories of peeling paint and shuttered windows. The next moment the porch was a stage. String lights blinked in a slow, happy pattern. Spotlights swept the yard. Animatronic skeletons snapped their jaws open and closed. A fog machine breathed out a thin, low mist that rolled across the steps like a slow river. Music, the same cheesy, spooky tune that had played every Halloween for 20 years, started from speakers no one could find, bright and clear in the cold air. Neighbors stepped out in robes and slippers and stared with their phones up. Mrs. Callahan from number 12 held her coffee so tight it steamed. "Daniel?" she said, more to himself than to anyone. The house answered with a laugh, the exact laugh people remembered from the old shows, the booming, friendly voice that used to say, "You can check in, but you'll never check out." It sounded like Daniel, even though Daniel Harker had been dead for 2 years. Windows upstairs flickered with shadows. Behind the lace curtains, it looked like someone moved, slow silhouettes that paced the bedrooms and peered down at the street. The lights in the front bay window pulsed as if somebody inside was breathing. For 15 minutes, Hollow Street was not a sleeping neighborhood. It was an audience, holding its breath and staring at a show no one had paid for. Then at 12:15 the music stopped like someone had yanked the plug. The lights went out. The fog drifted away into the trees. The house was dark again, cold as if the night itself had taken it back. The next morning, the police and the curious came with flashlights and clipboards. They found dust on the porch decorations, like the props had been sitting untouched for years. They found no wiring connected to anything. The speakers were empty boxes. The animatronics were stiff with old battery acid and cobwebs. But the weirdest thing was the cameras. Neighbors had motion cameras and doorbell cameras pointed at Hollow Street. Every single recording from 11:58 p.m. to 12:15 a.m. was empty, a strip of time that showed nothing, no cars, no fog, no blinking lights. As if the house and its show had happened outside of time. When I first heard about it, Lisa called me on her lunch break. She works at the town office and knows everybody's gossip before it even gets to the police. "You need to come," she said. "You need to see the footage." She used the quiet voice people use when something is wrong and small-town radio won't fix it. The sheriff and a detective were already there, looking exhausted and the color of someone who had been awake too long. They played the footage on a laptop in a small kitchen that smelled like coffee and old wallpaper. The video was shaky and old school, the kind of home camera people used before everything went to the cloud. The tape showed a dark street, a porch light went from off to on, and then nothing. The tape jumped to 12:20, and the camera kept recording, showing people in pajamas pointing and whispering. What happened in the middle, exactly when the house came alive and sang its song, was gone. "It's like a blank," Detective Hargrove said. He rubbed his hands over his face like he was trying to wipe the confusion away. "Like there's a spot where the tape just—" He left the sentence unfinished, and the room filled with his unspoken fear. Old videos sometimes breaks. Power lines sometimes die. But camera failure didn't explain why the porch looked brand new at midnight and dusty by dawn. It didn't explain why Mrs. Callahan swore she heard Daniel's laugh through the speakers. We started to walk the story back. We had to know who Daniel was, because the whole thing smelled of memory and habit. Daniel Harker was the kind of man who made Halloween into a job he loved. He lived alone in that old house on Hollow Street, and for 20 years he turned it into a big, loud show for the town. People from Salem and nearby towns would come in cars and park down the street to walk through his yard. Daniel built props in his garage, wired fog machines like a musician sets up pedals, and made animatronics that clattered with batteries and clever tricks. He gave free candy to kids with good costumes and told the same silly, spooky joke every year. He loved the performance. He loved the neighborhood coming alive. When he died, a sudden heart attack in March, the kind of thing you don't see coming, people came by with flowers and sad faces. They left the house as it had been, more out of shock than respect, props in the yard, the skeletons still in the window, the big painted sign that said, Harker's Haunted Hollow, leaning against a fence. The power was turned off because the house was empty, and the bank owned the place. Years passed. Dust settled like a second skin. Kids dared each other to run up the walk and touch a fake tombstone. Someone spray-painted a heart on the back gate. It was, people said, a house full of other people's memories. But memory is sticky. It has weight. On certain nights, neighbors would swear they smelled a cigarette on the porch or saw an extra light where none could be. Mostly, they told the story over coffee and moved on. Hollow Street was a small street with small secrets. The night it woke up, I stood by the detective and watched the replay, and I thought about the way a town keeps a man alive by remembering him. Daniel's laugh was a sound that belonged to everyone who had ever chased a Halloween thrill. It was how the show said, "Welcome." Hearing it again, after 2 years of silence, felt like someone had lit a match in a closed room. We looked for signs of trespassing. We checked for fresh footprints in the dew, for cigarette butts, for garbage left by pranksters. The ground around the porch was stamped with last year's leaves. The scent of the fog machine was gone. The speakers still looked like boxes. But then the detective lifted a small scrap of paper from a porch step. It was a child's treat bag, the plastic kind with cartoon witches. Inside, someone had left one candy and a coin, and a note folded small. The note read, "You left the show. We needed it back." It was written in a messy child's script. No signature. No date. The detective frowned. "Who would leave this?" he asked. People left things on porches all the time. But the idea of someone going into an empty house and setting a small altar for a dead man felt like the next circle of a story getting darker. We went door to door asking questions. Mrs. Callahan said she'd seen a shadow in the upstairs window at midnight, a tall thing that stood very still and then moved in a way that made no sense for a human. The Martinez boy said the music had been right outside his window, and he had pressed his face to the glass and watched the fog roll across the yard. It looked happy, he told us, wide-eyed and shivering even in daylight. A teenage girl, who'd filmed the whole thing on her phone, handed us footage that showed the house dark and then the porch lights blinking, but the audio track cut in and out with low, strange tones that made the speakers sound like they were singing in a different room. Then someone found the security footage from the house next door. That camera had somehow recorded the hours around midnight, except for the exact 17 minutes when the house danced and sang. The clip showed nothing. Not even the fog. A clean strip of black and then people in pajamas pointing and whispering. Hargrove replayed the empty strips slow and slow, like a man trying to find a missing word in a sentence. The blank looked like a removed page. We thought this might be a trick. Some prank using a battery generator hidden in the yard. But there was no generator. We thought an electrician had wired something from a distance, maybe using a remote battery pack. But the power company confirmed the line to the house had been cut. We thought a neighbor had set up motion lights from another house, aimed at Hollow Street, and someone had cleverly moved props. But the animatronics were ancient, their joints seized with rust. They didn't move without being wound and battery-fed in the garage where Daniel kept his treasures. The more we looked, the more the thing behaved like a memory that could get up and walk if people wanted it to. Like the house could borrow the old man's laugh from somewhere in the town and play it back, like a record on a loop. Or worse, like it had been waiting for someone to press play. At the sheriff's office, the detective pulled out an old interview tape from when Daniel had first started the haunt. Daniel's voice was different then, younger, excited, proud. He talked about how Halloween made the town laugh all at once. He said, "A house has a life if people give it one." Hearing it now, after the midnight show and the blank footage, felt like hearing a promise from the grave. That night, after the police left, a small group of neighbors stayed out on the street, whispering and holding flashlights like candles. They dared each other to walk up the path and touch the sign. One brave teenage boy walked to the porch and pressed his hand to the old wood. It was colder than he expected, not the cold of the night air, but the kind that sits in places left alone for too long. He turned to leave and his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number read, "Thanks for coming back." He showed the message to us, and it made the hairs on our arms stand up. We tried to trace the number. It came back to a block sender. Whoever sent it used someone else's phone to hide. We thought that was as strange as the night could be. We were wrong. At 4 a.m., Detective Hargrove's phone chimed with a new camera clip from a neighbor he didn't expect. The clip was small and grainy, a cheap doorbell camera that usually only recorded motion. It showed a dark street and the porch light off. Then, at 11:59, a pale outline approached the porch. It looked like a small child walking up the steps. The child stopped, bent down, and left something. The camera recorded the child walking away. At 12:02, the lights came on and the music started. The odd part was not the child. It was the pause after the child walked away. The camera showed the figure stop beyond the yard and look back. The figure's head tilted in a way that no human head should tilt. Then the clip went black for the next 17 minutes. We sat and watched the clip and the silence felt wrong. The detective's jaw worked like he was chewing on a worry. The boy who'd been brave enough to touch the sign felt sick and excused himself to go home. The last frame of the clip before the black showed something on the porch step where the child had bent down. The image was fuzzy, but there was a small blue coin or token on the wood. The camera's motion sensor had picked it up for a second before the recording failed. The detective paused the video and zoomed in. The token looked like a thing you would hand out at a carnival, round, simple, worn smooth. Someone had dropped it into Daniel's haunted house like an offering. Detective Hargrove looked up at us in the dim light and said, "We closed the place. We locked it up. The bank owns it now. But either someone opened that house tonight, or something else did." He did not finish the sentence. The porch lights blinked once in the distance, as if answering him, far higher than midnight and far below reason. We all heard a sound then, soft and far away, like a laugh being practiced by the wind. And in the kitchen of the house on Hollow Street, the old CD player that had not worked in years clicked on, once, and then began to spin a single, too familiar tune. The CD kept playing that thin, cheerful tune all night like a clock stuck on a single hour. It filled the porch and the street and our heads with a sound we all knew too well. I sat at the kitchen table with Detective Hargrove until dawn, watching the little silver disc spin in the old player. The house smelled like dust and old paper and something sweeter under it, like candy left too long in a jar. When morning came, sunlight made the fog into sugar and the porch into proof that something had happened. Hargrove called in more officers. The bank sent a man with a clipboard. A TV crew from a nearby station showed up because in a town like ours, a story like this grew teeth fast. We kept expecting someone to explain it away, a prank, a clever generator, a hidden speaker. But the house refused to be explained. The front door was locked, like it had been for years. The lock clicked open on the second try. Someone with an old key had turned it for us. The inside of the house smelled like the outside of a museum, the smell of things kept and not used. The living room was a stage frozen, orange wrinkled pumpkins, a plastic witch with a crooked hat, webs stretched like lace. The TV in the corner was stacked on boxes, its screen dusty. The stairs creaked underfoot with the tired sound of an old man getting up. We split into teams and moved through the room slow, the way you move through a place that might remember you. In the kitchen, there were notes stuck to the fridge in Daniel's handwriting. One read, in crooked, excited letters, "Keep the lights for the kids." Another was a shopping list. In the attic, we found props and crates and an old clipboard with the yearly plan for the show. The animatronics sat like old puppets, their eyes cloudy. There were no signs of recent battery use. The fog machine in the garage was dry and full of dust. On the second floor, a hallway smelled like cedar and something sweeter, the scent that ghost stories always borrow. The lace curtains in the front bedroom were still sewn shut where kids years ago had tried to peek. The windows were locked. In a back room, behind a bookshelf that Daniel had propped against the wall, someone had done what the houses of memory sometimes ask for. They had created a small shrine. Toys from different decades lined a shelf. A plastic pumpkin held a single coin, the blue token the camera had caught. Around the coin were Polaroid photos of people smiling in front of the house through the years. The pictures were worn at the edges. In one of them, Daniel stood in the doorway, younger and grinning, the same laugh folded in his face. Under the photos was a stack of cassette tapes with Daniel's handwriting on the spines. We sat on the dusty floor and played one on a battered cassette player. Daniel's voice came out, warm and proud, telling the story of the first time he lit the porch and watched the street fill with trick-or-treaters. He spoke like a man who believed a house could become a person if you loved it enough. At the end of one tape there was a scratchy recording of the Halloween song mixed with a child's giggle. The tape cut, and nothing else. It sounded like a memory on a loop, taped over a dozen times. "Maybe he left parts of himself here," Hargrove said quietly. "People do the strangest things when they love something." We found a small notebook on the floor under the shrine. In it were lists, names, dates, things Daniel wanted to fix before the next Halloween. But at the back someone had written in a different hand, a child's careful letter saying, "We missed the show," and "We bring presents." There were drawings of the house with lights and faces in the windows, smiling and sad at the same time. No one could say for sure who had been leaving the tokens and the small altar. The detective checked the names on the Polaroids. Some were people who had moved away. Some were long gone. One photograph showed a child who would have been 20 now. The inspector frowned. "This goes back further than I thought," he said. "This isn't just the last 2 years. It's older." We spent a week interviewing everyone who might know something. People told us about Daniel in pieces. A lonely man who loved fear more than he loved himself sometimes, who learned to wire a fog machine before he learned to fix a broken heart. Neighbors spoke in soft, proud tones about how he had brought the town together, even if he'd never married or had kids. Old women wept and said Daniel used to bring blankets and lemonade to the children who came through. A former girlfriend sent a note that said simply, "Daniel wanted to be remembered. He wanted to belong." The more we learned, the less we found a motive for the midnight show. There was no evidence that anyone had broken into the house. No footprints in the yard that matched anyone in town. No fresh batteries. The police checked nearby power boxes and found nothing. The lights had worked somehow for those 17 minutes, and no one else seemed to have seen the wires. Then, one afternoon, the detective got a call from the bank's maintenance man. He had found a narrow hatch under Daniel's workbench in the garage. The hatch led to a crawl space that ran under part of the house, and down under the porch. In that low, dark crawl we found a tangle of old wires, jars, and something that made our skin feel like it had been brushed by ice. There were strings of Christmas lights, old speaker parts, and a small, battered CD player that looked like it had been used and left for years. Near it were dozens of small blue tokens, identical to the one on the porch. Someone had placed them like coins on a shrine. "This is it," the maintenance man said. "This is where he kept his tricks." Hargrove lifted a token and looked at it. On one side someone had scratched letters so tiny it took a magnifier to read them. They spelled simply, "Come." On the other side, the token had an older, fainter mark, like who had once owned it. We took photos. We sealed the crawl. We called in the state for help dealing with the objects. But the tokens presented a new riddle. None of the materials had been produced recently. The plastic felt older, worn in ways modern cheap plastic is not. Whoever had made the tokens had used an old mold, or many of them had been collected over time. The tokens spoke to a long game, not a prank. The town argued about what to do. Some wanted to demolish the house to end the story. Others insisted we should leave it like a shrine. The mayor tried to be practical. "We can't have people trespassing every Halloween," she said. "But we can't be in the business of destroying memories." The bank wanted to sell the property fast. Lawsuits threatened. People in town took sides. At each meeting someone mentioned the sound at midnight, the laugh, and the hairs on the back of everyone's neck stood up. On the night the town voted to board up the windows and chain the gate for good, something different happened. I was there in the crowd, standing under a lamppost, and saw a small group of people slip through the crowd and walk toward the gate. They were older now, kids who had come to Daniel's shows years before, and they carried candles. They left on the porch something smaller than the coin, a tiny music box wrapped in a scrap of lace. It was simple, pretty, and plain. They whispered as they left it, like saying goodbye. The town watching them felt like it had been given back some small piece of its own childhood. A few nights later, the board began to demolish the porch under the bank's permission. The crew worked carefully. They took the animatronics apart and placed them in plastic. They boxed the old props and left them in storage. The house was quiet during the day and looked like any other empty house on any other sleepy street. People said they could breathe easier. But the night after the porch came down, when the demolition crew had left and the boards were stacked in neat piles, the CD player in the kitchen clicked on again. The tune started. No one had been inside that night. The house was still cordoned off. A security camera a block away recorded a pale light moving across the yard as if something small had walked through. The camera image glitched, and for a few seconds a small figure appeared to stand on the porch and wave. Then the frame froze on a close-up of a tiny music box lying on the steps where the porch used to be. The image had a small smear of something dark at its edge. The camera failed immediately after, the file corrupted. That was the last recorded proof we had. The bank finally returned the property to the town under public pressure. The town council voted to clear the lot and plant trees where the house had been. A contractor came and knocked the walls down, and the sound of wood hitting earth echoed like applause. They hauled away the rubble and in its place they planted oaks and maples to mark a quiet park. The ground settled. Kids ran over the new grass. The town painted a small plaque that said, "For Memories." They held a ceremony and people spoke about Daniel and about Halloween and about how small things, laughter, light, could make a whole community. Months later, I received a package at my apartment with no return address. Inside was a small blue token like the ones we had found under the porch. There was also a note, written in a child's careful letters. It read, "Thanks for listening. We kept it for the show. We let it go. Keep your windows closed." No signature. I put the token in a drawer and tried to forget about the nights I had spent listening for a laugh. Sometimes, when the wind comes off the trees and slips through my neighborhood, I think I hear the tiniest echo of that tune in the distance. It is a thin, faraway sound, like a music box someone left in a drawer. Some nights the hum of that old house feels like a memory that will not die. Some nights it seems like a warning. The town says the lot is a park now. People bring their kids to play and to run under the trunks. They leave candy on Halloween and tell the story of Daniel Harker with a soft smile. A few older folks still swear they hear a laugh on the last night of October, a laugh that curls around the trees and then slips away. They say if you listen right at midnight, you can almost hear someone singing along to a song that wants to be remembered. For me, I leave the lights on that night. I close my windows. I keep a small token on my shelf, not as a trophy, but as proof that some stories do not end when their houses fall. They move into the ground and the saplings and the people who laugh and the children who leave offerings. They live in the way we remember, and sometimes, if we are foolish and kind and curious at once, they come back just long enough to say hello. Maybe that is all a house ever asks, to be seen, to be listened to be loved. Maybe that is the kind of thing a town offers from itself. Maybe it is safer this way, to plant trees and make light. Or maybe, under the bark and soil, the house waits in a small, patient way, humming for the moment someone will press play again. The night I put the token away, I thought about Daniel's promise and about the line he had shouted every year in his booming, cheerful voice. "You can check in, but you'll never check out." I let the words sit in the room like a question. I am not sure which of us is the show and which is the audience. If you ever find yourself on Hollow Street in October, and you hear a tiny music box in the trees, remember to smile and step back. Some things are meant to be remembered at a distance. Some shows are best watched from the road. And sometimes, when the lights come back on, it is only because someone, somewhere, decided to press play.